when Ilara, a waitress whose world was circumscribed by the grief of her past and the relentless demands of the present, offered a warm meal to a distraught father and his withdrawn, silent son in the corner of her dreary diner. She did so without an ounce of expectation. She acted from a place of pure, unadorned empathy, a quiet acknowledgment of shared human struggle. She was entirely unaware that this simple gesture of kindness was a pebble tossed into the vast, turbulent ocean of global commerce. For the man, Alistair, was not merely a struggling father. He was a titan of industry, a CEO whose empire was teetering on the brink of collapse, and the silent boy, Leo, held within his quiet mind the keys to 11 different languages. A frustrated prodigy, unable to connect with the world around him, Ilara could never have known that her small act would save a $100 million deal, resurrect a forgotten dream, and forge a new destiny for them all. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. The city exhaled a damp gray breath as Ilara made her way through the pre-dawn streets. A familiar chill seeping into the thin fabric of her coat. A coat that had seen too many winters and held the faint, lingering scent of countless sorrows. Each crack in the pavement was a line on a map of her life, a life lived in the margins, in the quiet spaces between exhaustion and necessity. The diner, the Silver Spoon, was a misnomer. There was nothing silver about it. It was a haven of worn linoleum and cracked vinyl, its air thick with the aroma of burnt coffee and frying bacon. A smell that clung to her hair and clothes like a second skin. Yet within these tired walls, Ilara moved with a quiet grace that defied her surroundings. She was the keeper of stories, the silent witness to the city's lonely hearts who sought refuge in the warmth of a coffee cup. Her own story was one she kept locked away, a tale of a brilliant academic career abandoned to care for her ailing younger sister, a dream of translating ancient poetry sacrificed for the stark reality of medical bills and rent. Her kindness was not a performance. It was the very core of her being, a resilient flower pushing its way through concrete. She refilled coffee cups with a gentle hand, listened to tired complaints with impatient ear, and saw the person, not the patron. She was profoundly, invisibly, good in a world that rarely seemed to notice. Her integrity was her only real possession, a quiet dignity that shone brighter than any neon sign, a silent rebellion against the harshness of her circumstances. She expected nothing from the world but the chance to survive another day, to ensure her sister had the care she needed, to hold on to the flickering ember of hope that one day the poetry would return. This particular morning, the rain mirrored the melancholy in her soul, each drop a testament to the weight she carried, a weight she bore with a strength she herself did not recognize, a strength that was about to be tested and transformed in the most unexpected of ways. Alistair Finch existed in a world of polished steel and panoramic views, a kingdom built of glass and ambition where the city sprawled beneath him like a conquered territory. His penthouse apartment was a testament to his success, a minimalist masterpiece of clean lines and cold surfaces, where art was an investment and furniture was a statement. Yet the silence in those vast, empty rooms was a roaring abyss. He was a man who commanded boardrooms, who could move markets with a single word, but he could not command a smile from his own son. Leo, his brilliant, beautiful boy, was the ghost that haunted his opulent life. At 7 years old, the child was a linguistic prodigy, fluent in 11 languages, a mind that could dance between Mandarin, Arabic, and Polish with effortless grace. But since the death of his mother 2 years prior, a vibrant, loving woman who had been the sun in their universe, Leo had retreated into a fortress of silence. His languages became his armor, a collection of worlds he could inhabit where no one, not even his father, could reach him. Alistair, a man lost in his own labyrinth of grief, tried to bridge the chasm with things: rare books, expensive tutors, the latest technology, but he had forgotten the language of the heart. He was drowning in his success, suffocated by the very empire he had built. Now, that empire was threatening to crumble. A $100 million green energy initiative, a project that had been his late wife's passion, her dream of a better world, was failing. A consortium of international partners from Japan, Brazil, and Poland were pulling away, citing cultural insensitivity and a breakdown in communication. It was not just about the money, it was about her legacy. He was losing everything that mattered, and he was utterly, terrifyingly alone in his gilded cage. A powerful king who had forgotten how to be a father. The storm that raged outside was a pale imitation of the tempest inside Alistair's limousine. The rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers did little to soothe the frantic pounding in his chest as he listened to the disembodied voice on his speakerphone deliver another piece of devastating news. The Japanese delegation felt their customs had been disrespected. The Brazilians found his team's approach too aggressive and impersonal. The Poles sensed a lack of genuine commitment. It was a symphony of failure, conducted by his own emotional ineptitude. He ended the call with a frustrated sigh, the sound swallowed by the plush leather of the interior. It was then that the car lurched violently and coasted to a dead stop, the engine silent, the lights flickering out, a flat tire. On this day of all days, the driver, flustered, confirmed they were stranded in a part of the city Alistair hadn't set foot in for decades, a place of brick tenements and struggling storefronts. Rain lashed against the windows, blurring the world outside into a watercolor of urban decay. Leo, seated beside him, hadn't flinched. He simply stared out the window, his small face a mask of indifference, tracing the path of a raindrop with his finger. The sight of his son's detachment was a fresh stab of pain for Alistair. With no other option, he grabbed a plain, dark coat he kept in the car for emergencies, a deliberate disguise to shed the skin of the CEO, and stepped out into the deluge. He pulled Leo close, the boy's small body rigid under his arm, and they ran, two soaked and disparate souls, towards the only light that cut through the gloom, the faint, greasy glow of a diner sign that read, "The Silver Spoon." They entered not as a CEO and his heir, but as a father and son, looking for nothing more than shelter from the storm, completely unaware they were stepping into the epicenter of their own salvation. The bell above the door of the Silver Spoon announced their arrival with a cheerful, tinny jingle that felt entirely out of place with the grim reality of the day. They dripped onto the worn checkerboard floor, a small puddle forming around their feet, and for a moment they were just another piece of the diner's mundane tapestry. Alistair, accustomed to being the center of attention, felt a strange sense of relief in the anonymity. He guided Leo to a booth in the corner, the cracked red vinyl cold and damp against their clothes. He immediately pulled out his phone, his thumb flying across the screen, firing off a volley of terse emails, trying to staunch the bleeding of his failing enterprise. He was so engrossed in the digital crisis that he barely noticed Ilara approach their table. He mumbled an order for 2 coffees without looking up, his focus entirely on the glowing screen in his hand. Ilara, however, saw what he was missing. She saw the boy, Leo, sitting perfectly still, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes, wide and intelligent, taking in every detail of the humble diner. He wasn't looking at the menu or the salt shakers. He was watching the old woman in the next booth, listening to her speak to her friend in a language Ilara's heart faintly recognized from her grandmother's lullabies. Leo's gaze was one of intense concentration, a silent deconstruction of the unfamiliar cadence and rhythm. Ilara's focus shifted from the dismissive father to the lonely child. She saw the universe of unspoken thoughts swirling in his eyes. The profound isolation of a boy who could speak to the world in 11 tongues, but had no one to truly talk to. In that moment, he was not the son of a wealthy man. He was just a little boy lost in the storm. And her heart, a vessel long accustomed to mending the broken things of the world, went out to him. As Ilara placed the heavy ceramic mugs on the table, her hand brushed against a small, intricately carved wooden bird that had fallen from Leo's pocket. The boy gasped, a tiny, sharp sound, and lunged for it, but his small hands fumbled. The bird skittered across the floor, landing near the counter. Before Alistair could even register what had happened, his mind still miles away in a Tokyo boardroom, Leo let out a small, frustrated whisper, a word that was not English. "Przepraszam," he murmured, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I'm sorry." The word, Polish and pure, struck a chord deep within Ilara's memory. It was the language of her grandmother, the language of bedtime stories and warm, flower-dusted hugs. A wave of profound, sentimental warmth washed over her. She knelt, retrieving the small wooden bird, its surface smoothed by countless hours of anxious handling. She looked at Leo, her eyes soft with a genuine, unpitying compassion. "Nikshi ni stawo, maui ptashku," she said, her accent gentle and imperfect. "It's all right, little bird." The effect on Leo was instantaneous and astonishing. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. A light, a genuine spark of connection, ignited in their depths. He looked from her to the bird and back again, a slow, wondrous smile spreading across his face for the first time that day. Perhaps for the first time that week. Alistair, finally jolted from his digital trance by the sudden shift in the atmosphere, looked up. He saw his son, his silent, unreachable son, beaming at this stranger, this tired-looking waitress. For a moment, the $100 million deal, the failing legacy, the crushing weight of his world, all of it faded away, replaced by the staggering, beautiful, and utterly perplexing sight of his son's smile. He had no idea what the waitress had said, but he knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that it was a language he had long since forgotten how to speak. The moment stretched, a fragile bubble of warmth in the cold, damp diner. Ilara offered the wooden bird back to Leo, her fingers gently closing his over the small object. She then turned her attention to the food, bringing them 2 steaming bowls of chicken soup, a simple, unpretentious offering that felt like the most profound gesture of hospitality in the world. She hadn't put it on their bill, it was a gift, an unspoken understanding that sometimes what people needed most was not a transaction, but a moment of grace. Alistair, momentarily speechless, simply watched. He watched as his son, who had barely eaten a full meal in months, picked up his spoon and eagerly began to eat, his eyes occasionally flicking up to Ilara with a look of shy gratitude. The tension that had been a permanent resident in Alistair's shoulders began to ease, the knot in his stomach loosening its grip. He saw Ilara not as a waitress, but as a person, a woman with a kindness so profound and instinctual that it had effortlessly breached the walls his son had built around himself, and walls that all of Alistair's wealth and power had been unable to penetrate. He felt a pang of something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Humility. He, Alistair Finch, the master of the universe, had been so consumed by his own problems that he had failed to see the simple solution right in front of him, a human connection. He was so busy trying to manage a global enterprise that he had forgotten how to manage a conversation with his own child. This woman, with her worn-out shoes and her tired eyes, possessed a form of wealth he couldn't begin to quantify. She had given his son a moment of joy, and in doing so, she had given Alistair a sliver of hope, a flickering candle in the overwhelming darkness of his life. He ate his soup, the warmth spreading through him, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt something other than the crushing weight of his own failure. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle by the time Alistair's driver called to say the car was repaired. As they prepared to leave, Alistair reached for his wallet, a sleek black leather object that was a symbol of his status, a tool he used to solve every problem. He pulled out a crisp $100 bill and placed it on the table, a sum that was insultingly large for 2 bowls of soup and a coffee. A clumsy attempt to quantify the gratitude he felt. Ilara saw the gesture and offered a small, sad smile. "That's not necessary, sir," she said, her voice quiet but firm. The soup was a gift. She gently pushed the bill back towards him. "Just seeing your son smile was more than enough payment." Her refusal was not a judgment, but a simple statement of fact, a declaration of her values. She lived in a world where kindness was its own currency. A concept so foreign to Alistair that it momentarily stunned him. He was a man who believed everything had a price, that every action was a transaction. Ilara's simple, dignified refusal to participate in his worldview was a quiet revolution. In his haste to leave, to return to his world of problems and solutions, he inadvertently left something on the seat of the booth. It was a small, unassuming object, a leather-bound journal, its cover softened with age, its pages filled with elegant, looping script. It was not his, it had been his wife's, a collection of her thoughts, her dreams, her poetry. It was the one object he carried with him always, a tangible piece of her soul. And in his moment of emotional disarray, he had left it behind in a greasy spoon diner. A sacred relic abandoned in a profane world. The following morning, the diner was bathed in the pale, watery sunlight that often follows a storm. Ilara was polishing the counter, the familiar, repetitive motion a form of meditation, when the tinny bell above the door chimed. She looked up, expecting a regular, perhaps a local construction worker or a tired nurse coming off a night shift. Instead, she saw a woman in a perfectly tailored gray suit, her expression one of polite, professional impassivity. She held a sleek, expensive-looking briefcase in one hand, and she stood out in the humble diner, like a diamond in a coal bin. The woman approached the counter, her eyes scanning the room before they settled on Ilara. "I believe my employer was here yesterday," she said, her voice as crisp and starched as her blouse. "A man and his young son. He may have left something behind, a small, leather-bound journal." Ilara's heart gave a small jolt. She had found the journal after they had left, its presence on the worn vinyl seat a strange and intimate discovery. She had felt its importance in the weight of it, in the feel of the soft leather. She had tucked it away safely beneath the counter, intending to keep it for the man should he ever return. She retrieved it now and handed it to the woman. "I'm so glad you came for it," Ilara said with genuine relief. "I was worried it might be important." The woman took the journal, her expression softening for a fraction of a second. "More than you could possibly know," she replied. She then reached into her briefcase and pulled out an envelope. "Mr. Finch would like to extend his gratitude for your kindness and for the safekeeping of this item." Inside the envelope, Ilara could see the corner of a check. A check with an astonishing number of zeros. The central mystery of the man's identity was now solved. Mr. Finch. Alistair Finch. The CEO of Finch Global, a name she'd seen in the newspapers, a man whose wealth was legendary. The realization was a dizzying blow. Ilara looked from the envelope to the impeccably dressed woman and back again. A wave of confusion and a faint, unidentifiable sense of disappointment washed over her. She gently pushed the envelope back across the counter, just as she had pushed back the $100 bill the day before. "Please tell Mr. Finch that I am grateful for the thought," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. "But I can't accept this. I didn't do anything to deserve a reward. I just gave a little boy some soup." Her refusal, for the second time, was a quiet but powerful statement. It was a rejection not of the money itself, but of the entire system of belief that suggested every act of human decency must be commodified, that kindness was something to be purchased. The assistant, a woman who had likely never encountered such a refusal in her entire career, was taken aback. She studied Ilara for a long moment, her professional mask slipping to reveal a flicker of genuine curiosity, perhaps even admiration. "He was insistent," the assistant said, her tone a little less formal now. He said you showed him something he had forgotten existed." Ilara simply shook her head, a small, sad smile gracing her lips. "Then that is the best reward I could ask for. Please, just tell him I hope his son is feeling better." The assistant, realizing she would not win this argument, finally nodded. She placed the envelope back in her briefcase and turned to leave. As she reached the door, she paused and looked back at Ilara. "My name is Eleanor, by the way," she said, "and I have a feeling we'll be seeing each other again." With that cryptic statement, she was gone, leaving Ilara alone in the quiet diner, the pale morning sun casting long shadows across the floor. Her world suddenly feeling both much larger and infinitely more complicated than it had just a few moments before. Alistair sat in his office, the recovered journal resting on the vast expanse of his mahogany desk. Eleanor had recounted her entire exchange with the waitress, her tone a mixture of bewilderment and respect. She had described Ilara's quiet dignity, her unwavering refusal of the money, her simple, heartfelt concern for Leo. The story settled over Alistair, a heavy cloak of shame and wonder. He had tried to pay her for her humanity, to reduce a moment of pure, unadulterated grace into a simple business transaction. Her refusal was not an insult, it was a lesson, and it humbled him more than any failed business deal ever could. He picked up the journal, his wife's journal, and opened it to a random page. Her words, full of hope and a belief in the inherent goodness of people, seemed to mock him. She had dreamed of building a company that was not just profitable, but also compassionate, a force for good in the world. He had honored the profitable part, but he had let the compassion wither and die with her. At that moment, his phone rang. Another call from his team, another litany of failures. The deal was officially dead. The final meeting was a mere formality, a chance for the international partners to officially withdraw. They felt the soul of the project was gone. They were right. He hung up the phone, the silence of his office pressing in on him. He looked out the window at the city below, a sprawling metropolis of millions of strangers, and he felt a profound sense of isolation. And then, an idea began to form, a desperate, audacious, utterly illogical idea. It was a gamble so wild, so far outside the conventional rules of his world, that it was either the act of a madman or a stroke of genius. He thought of Ilara, the waitress who had reached his son with a few words of Polish in a bowl of soup. He thought of her quiet strength, her unshakable integrity. He buzzed his assistant. "Eleanor," he said, his voice filled with a newfound, albeit shaky, resolve. "Find the waitress. Bring her here. Now." The arrival of the sleek black town car outside the Silver Spoon caused a minor stir on the street. When Eleanor, dressed in another impeccable suit, stepped out and entered the diner for the second time in as many days, the regulars fell silent, their coffee cups paused halfway to their lips. Ilara was wiping down a table, her mind 1,000 miles away, when she saw the woman approaching. Her heart began to pound, a nervous rhythm against her ribs. She had no idea what to expect. Eleanor's expression was different this time. It was less formal, more urgent. "Ilara," she began, foregoing any preamble, "Mr. Finch needs to see you. He has sent a car for you." The request was so outlandish, so surreal, that Ilara could only stare. "See me? What for?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I don't understand." Eleanor offered a small, sympathetic smile. "To be perfectly honest, I'm not entirely sure I understand either," she admitted. "But he was very clear. He believes you can help him. He says you have something his entire company is missing." The statement hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. Help him? The billionaire CEO? Ilara looked down at her own hands, chapped and rough from years of hard work. At her faded apron stained with coffee and grease. What could she possibly offer a man like Alistair Finch? It made no sense. It was a request from a different universe, a world of power and influence that she had only ever glimpsed in newspapers. A part of her, the sensible, cautious part, wanted to refuse, to retreat into the safety of her predictable, albeit difficult, life. But another part, a smaller, more curious part, a part that still remembered her dreams of a larger world, was intrigued. And then she thought of Leo, the sad, silent boy with the universe in his eyes. She remembered his smile. "Okay," she heard herself say, the word feeling foreign and brave on her tongue. "I'll go." The journey to the headquarters of Finch Global was like traveling to another planet. Ilara sat in the back of the town car, the supple leather seats feeling impossibly soft. The silent hum of the engine, a world away from the rattling clatter of her daily bus ride. She watched as the familiar landscape of her neighborhood, with its brick facades and corner bodegas, dissolved, replaced by a gleaming cityscape of glass and steel. The Finch Tower was an architectural marvel, a shard of obsidian piercing the clouds, a monument to the power and ambition of the man who had built it. As she was escorted through the lobby, her worn coat and simple shoes felt glaringly out of place amidst the polished marble floors and the hushed, expensive silence. People in tailored suits turned to stare, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Ilara felt a blush creep up her neck, a familiar feeling of being judged, of being invisible and simultaneously too visible. She clutched her worn handbag tighter, a small, tangible piece of her own world in this alien environment. The elevator ride to the top floor was a silent, dizzying ascent that left her stomach lurching. When the doors opened, she stepped into an office that was larger than her entire apartment. A single wall of floor-to-ceiling glass offered a breathtaking, godlike view of the city. And there, standing in the middle of it all, was Alistair Finch. He was no longer the stressed, disguised father from the diner. He was dressed in a sharp, dark suit, the picture of power and authority. Yet, as he turned to face her, She saw the same haunted look in his eyes, the same desperate vulnerability she had glimpsed through his frustration. He was a king in a castle, but his throne was a lonely one. Alistair gestured for Elara to sit, an awkwardness in his movement that belied his powerful persona. There was a small, gentle humor in the situation. A struggling waitress being summoned to the pinnacle of corporate power. A scene so unlikely, it bordered on the absurd. He didn't know where to begin. The chasm between their two worlds seemed impossibly wide. "Thank you for coming," he started, his voice formal. "I know this must be unusual." Elara simply nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "My business," he continued, deciding that directness was the only path forward, "is on the verge of a catastrophic failure, a $100 million project. It was my late wife's dream." He paused, the admission costing him a visible effort. "The deal is collapsing because of a communication breakdown. My partners, they are from Japan, Brazil, and Poland. They feel we are cold, that we lack a soul." He looked at Elara then, his gaze intense, searching. "Yesterday, in your diner, you spoke to my son. He hasn't connected with anyone like that in 2 years. You didn't use business strategy or negotiation tactics. You used something else. Kindness. Empathy. You saw him. You saw him. You spoke a language he could understand, and it wasn't just about the Polish word." He took a deep breath, the sheer madness of his proposal dawning on him even as he said the words. "I have one final meeting with the partners this afternoon. It's a formality. They are coming to walk away. I want you to be there. I don't want you to be a translator or a business consultant. I want you to be, to you. I want you to bring what you brought to that diner into my boardroom. I want you to help me find the soul of my company." The request was insane. It was illogical. It was, he knew, his very last hope. Elara listened, her initial shock slowly giving way to a profound sense of understanding. She heard the desperation beneath the CEO's polished exterior. He wasn't asking for her business acumen. He was asking for her humanity. He was a man who had everything and nothing, a father who could provide his son with every material object, but not the one thing the boy truly needed: connection. She looked past the expensive suit and the panoramic view and saw the same lost man from the diner, a man drowning in a grief so deep he had forgotten how to swim. Her heart, which had always been predisposed to help the broken, felt a familiar pull. This man, for all his power and wealth, was as broken as any of the weary souls who sought refuge in her diner. She thought about the absurdity of it all, her, a waitress, in a high-stakes international business meeting. But then she remembered the words of her grandmother. Kindness is the one language everyone understands, even if they don't know the words. Perhaps this was her form of poetry, her translation work. Not of ancient texts, but of the human heart. She looked at Alistair, her gaze clear and steady. "I don't know anything about business, Mr. Finch," she said softly. "I can't save your deal." He looked down, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "But," she continued, and he looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes, "I do know about people. And I know that sometimes the smallest gesture can make the biggest difference. I will come to your meeting. I will help if I can." A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled his knees washed over Alistair. He had extended the most illogical, desperate lifeline of his career, and this quiet, unassuming woman had taken it without hesitation. For the first time in a long time, the roaring abyss of silence in his life was pierced by a single, fragile note of hope. The hours leading up to the meeting were a whirlwind of surreal activity. Elara was shown to a small, elegant guest office. Eleanor, her demeanor now one of conspiratorial warmth, brought her a tablet computer. "Mr. Finch thought you might want to familiarize yourself with our partners," she said gently. Elara spent the next 2 hours not reading financial reports or market analyses, but learning about the people who were about to walk away from a fortune. She read about Mr. Enelias, Hend of Stache. Tanaka from Japan, a man who was a patron of the arts and a practitioner of the traditional tea ceremony. A ritual of harmony and respect. She learned about Mrs. Almeida from Brazil, a woman who had started her career as a community organizer and was passionate about music, particularly the soulful melodies of bossa nova. And she read about Mr. Pigeons and Mr. Sevens, Adorned. Nowak from Poland, a man who had grown up on a farm and still spoke lovingly of the apple orchards of his youth. These were not corporate monoliths. They were people with histories, passions, and values. They were people who felt disrespected, unheard. Alara didn't focus on business strategy. She focused on finding a common language, a point of human connection. She made notes, not about profit margins, but about culture. She researched the proper way to pour tea, she listened to the melancholic beauty of a famous Brazilian song, and she found a traditional recipe for Polish apple cake, a zarlotka, that was almost identical to the one her grandmother used to make. She was not preparing for a negotiation. She was preparing to host a gathering of human beings. She was preparing to offer them a different kind of value, one that couldn't be quantified on a spreadsheet. The boardroom was a place of palpable tension. It was a cold, sterile environment, dominated by a long black table that felt more like a battlefield than a place for discussion. The delegations were seated, their faces grim, their body language closed and hostile. Mr. Tanaka sat ramrod straight, his expression impassive. Mrs. Almeida tapped her pen impatiently, her frustration barely concealed. Mr. Nowak stared out the window, his mind clearly elsewhere. Alistair's team of executives sat opposite them, their faces a mask of strained professionalism. The air was thick with failure. Alistair began the meeting with a stiff, formal apology that did little to thaw the icy atmosphere. The translators, technically proficient but emotionally tone-deaf, relayed the words, but none of the intended sincerity. The deal was slipping away with every passing second. Ilara sat quietly at the side of the room, an observer, a ghost in the machine of corporate power. She watched as the two sides spoke past each other, their words like ships passing in the night. It was a dialogue of the deaf. Then, during a particularly tense exchange about contractual obligations, Alistair, looking pale and desperate, caught her eye. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. Taking a deep breath, Alara stood up. All eyes in the room turned to her, a collective silent question hanging in the air. Who was this woman? She walked not to the head of the table, but to a small service area where a tea and coffee service had been set up. Her movements were calm, deliberate, and full of a quiet grace that immediately commanded the room's attention. The hostile negotiations ground to a halt, replaced by a stunned, curious silence. Alara did not speak at first. She simply began to prepare tea. She moved with a focused, reverent calm, her hands steady. She addressed Mr. Tanaka directly, her voice soft but clear. "Mr. Tanaka," she said, bowing her head slightly in a gesture of respect she had read about. "I have read that the tea ceremony Chanyu is based on 4 principles: harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility. I'm afraid we have not offered you much of those things today." She then proceeded to prepare a cup of green tea, her actions precise and mindful, mirroring the steps she had studied. She presented the cup to him not as a waitress serving a customer, but as one person offering a moment of peace to another. Mr. 200ww.com. Tanaka watched her, his stern facade cracking slightly, a flicker of surprise, and then deep appreciation in his eyes. He accepted the cup with a solemn nod. She then turned to Mrs. Almeida. "Mrs. Almeida," she said, her tone warm and engaging, "I was listening to a song this morning, Chega de Saudade. The beautiful sadness in it reminded me that great passion and great melancholy often come from the same heart. This project was born from a great passion. I am sorry it has caused you such sadness." Mrs. Almeida's impatient tapping stopped. She looked at Alara, truly seeing her for the first time, a look of shocked recognition on her face. Finally, Alara faced Mr. Nowak, a gentle, nostalgic smile on her lips. "Mr. Nowak, my grandmother used to make a zarlotka, a Polish apple cake. The smell of cinnamon and apples always felt like home. I read that you grew up near apple orchards. My grandmother used to say that you cannot rush an apple tree. It needs time, care, and the right conditions to bear fruit. Perhaps we have been trying to rush this. Mr. Nowak turned from the window, his gaze distant and thoughtful, a ghost of a smile touching his lips as he was transported, for a moment, back to the orchards of his youth. Ilara finally addressed the entire room, her voice filled with an earnest, emotional power that transcended the sterile corporate environment. This project is not just about solar panels and wind turbines, she said, her gaze sweeping over the astonished faces of the international partners. It is not just about the $100 million. Mr. Finch's late wife. She dreamed of this. She dreamed of a world where technology served humanity, where progress did not come at the cost of our planet or our connections to one another. She believed in building something that would last, something that would bear fruit for generations to come, like a well-tended orchard. She paused, then looked directly at Alistair, who was watching her with an expression of raw, unguarded awe. I think, she continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper, that we have been so focused on the contract that we forgot about the dream. We forgot the heart of this project. The heart is not in the legal documents or the financial projections. It is in the shared hope for a better future. It is in harmony, passion, and the patience to let good things grow. It is in respect, the respect we have failed to show you, and for that, we are truly sorry. Silence descended upon the room, a silence that was no longer cold and hostile, but full of a profound, contemplative weight. Ilara had not negotiated a single clause. She had not discussed a single dollar figure. She had done something far more radical and far more effective. She had reminded them all why they were there. She had translated not their words, but their intentions, their hopes, and their shared humanity. She had saved the deal not with the language of business, but with the universal language of the heart. The tense, rigid postures of the delegates began to soften. Mr. Tanaka took a slow, deliberate sip of his tea, and then, for the first time that day, he smiled. It was a small, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. He spoke in Japanese, and his translator, who now seemed to understand that the meaning of the words was more important than their literal translation, relayed his message. She is right, he said. We have been discussing the vessel, but we have forgotten the spirit it is meant to contain. The spirit of this project is one of harmony. We are willing to talk again. Mrs. Almeida, a tear glistening in her eye, added in Portuguese, passion must be met with passion. For the first time, I have felt the true passion behind this endeavor. We will stay. Finally, Mr. Nowak spoke, his voice thick with emotion. My father was a farmer, he said in Polish. He taught me that trust is like the soil. Without it, nothing can grow. Today I feel like the soil has been made fertile again. The executives on Alistair's team were speechless, their playbooks and strategies rendered obsolete by this simple, profound display of human connection. Alistair Finch himself felt as though he was waking from a long, painful dream. He looked at Ilara, this incredible woman who had walked out of a storm and into his life, and he felt a wave of gratitude so immense it threatened to overwhelm him. She had not just saved his company, she had saved him from himself. She had resurrected his wife's dream and, in doing so, had shown him a way back to his own heart. The $100 million deal was no longer a burden, a legacy of grief. It was a promise, a testament to the extraordinary power of a single, selfless act of kindness. 6 months later, the sun shone brightly on a sprawling city park. The world was a vibrant tapestry of green grass, blue sky, and the joyful shouts of children. Seated on a bench were Alistair, Ilara, and a chattering, laughing Leo. The change in all of them was remarkable. Alistair's face had lost its harsh, stressed lines, replaced by a relaxed, easy smile. He was no longer just a CEO. He was a father, present and engaged. Ilara, dressed in a simple but elegant dress, radiated a quiet confidence. She was now the head of the Finch Global Foundation, a new, well-funded division of the company dedicated to community outreach and cultural exchange programs, an idea she had proposed and Alistair had enthusiastically embraced. Leo, the once silent boy, was a whirlwind of energy, switching effortlessly between English, Japanese, and Portuguese. As he described a squirrel's antics to his father and Alara, he was no longer hiding behind his languages. He was using them to share his joy with the world, to connect. Alistair watched him, his heart full. He reached over and gently took Alara's hand, his touch both a question and a promise. She smiled and squeezed his hand in return. A simple, eloquent confirmation. They were no longer a CEO and a waitress. They were the beginning of a family forged not in a boardroom, but in a humble diner, built on a foundation of kindness, empathy, and a bowl of chicken soup. The $100 million deal had been a success, the project flourishing under a new spirit of true partnership. But the real profit, the immeasurable return on investment, was sitting right here on this park bench, a testament to the fact that the greatest transactions in life are never about money. They are about the moments we choose to see the humanity in each other, the moments we offer a little bit of warmth to a stranger in a storm. In a world that often values power over people and wealth over worth, it is a profound and hopeful truth that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything. It can rescue a lonely boy, redeem a lost father, and save a dream that is worth more than any fortune. The real lesson is not just that kindness is powerful, but that it is a choice available to every single one of us, every single day. A choice that can, in the quietest, most